welcome all of you to our webinar, Pro Bono Financial Planning During the COVID-19 Crisis, What Advisors and Clients Need to Know. I should also mention we are recording this session, and we do plan to post it on our COVID-19 Resource Center, and that will be made available afterwards. So if you have friends or colleagues that are interested, please do encourage them to access it and see the recording. I'm John Dauphiné. I'm the CEO of the Foundation for Financial Planning. And today we're going to touch briefly on what the Foundation for Financial Planning is doing in the wake of the crisis, which I'll get to in a minute. And then Ryan Freilich, CFP, will present on the COVID-19 legislation that we've seen passed, and will also answer your questions as best he can. As folks know, there is so much that's sort of happening. There's a lot of late breaking news every day, and just trying to stay on top of it all can be challenging. So I think Ryan will give you a really good grounding today, but then there's still unknown variables as we as a nation grapple with this pandemic. And I want to also say we hope that you, your families and loved ones are all safe and well. It's clearly a very stressful time for folks, and I just want to acknowledge that right up front. The foundation team's been working remotely and really trying to pivot to this new world order and have as much impact as we can in terms of helping people. Ryan Freilich will be covering most of our webinar today. Ryan was a teacher and then a school administrator over HR issues, who then became a fee-only financial planner, and he's the owner of Deliberate Finances in the Washington, D.C. area. Ryan's affiliated with the XY Planning Network, and he came highly recommended by Michael Kitces, who is a big supporter of pro bono financial planning. So that was a great endorsement of Ryan, and he's also a veteran pro bono volunteer. And we really want to thank Ryan for donating his time today. Really, really generous, and we appreciate it very much. Before I turn to Ryan, let me just say a few words about what the foundation is doing to respond. And we'll just throw up a quick slide here. We really sort of set our response into a number of buckets, and one is emergency grants. We have our grantees working hard. We've also reached out to all of them. We are working with them. Some of them had to delay some of their programming because they can't do in person. We are doing some emergency grants to help them do virtual service delivery. We've also funded a couple new organizations such as Savvy Ladies and AdvisorsGiveBack.org. They have virtual delivery currently, so we are funding them through emergency grants to be able to scale more and help more people. We're also creating resources. We have an online resource center, and we're trying to curate the most relevant materials for pro bono advisors, nonprofits, and pro bono clients. So you can find that at foundationforfinancialplanning.org/coronavirus-resources. We also have this webinar series. I expect to see some more webinars in the near future. And we have a resource guide on the most critical provisions in the stimulus package provisions. And after this webinar, we will send that around as a PDF just for follow-up. It's also available on our online resource center. And then we're looking at new programmatic work to help the most vulnerable. We are doing work with our cancer-related partners to make sure that the volunteers are aware of the continuing developments in the wake of the crisis. We're also working with AARP and some other partners to bring pro bono financial guidance virtually to vulnerable seniors. So we have an event coming up this week and another one in June. We have a lot of volunteer CFP professionals who are helping answer questions and do one-on-one consultations with participants there. And then we're also looking at doing some work to help out underserved first responders. So hopefully more to come on that. That's in the development stage now. And then finally, No surprise, the social service sector, of which we are a part, is suffering greatly. About 83% of nonprofits are struggling financially. So we are really trying to do what we can in terms of thought leadership to shore up the social sector and help out nonprofits. And you'll see tomorrow, this is a bit of a confidential preview, but we've worked with the CFP board, FPA, and NAPFA on a message encouraging financial advisors to reach out to their clients with donor advised funds. There's about 121 billion sitting in these funds, and of course a huge need for funding so that nonprofits can keep afloat right now, and we'll be doing some work around that issue. We've also made available a matching platform for CFP volunteers to register and browse opportunities to help underserved people. And we're reaching out to many different nonprofits to populate their opportunities. So as nonprofits grapple with the crisis, it's going to take a little while, but we expect a lot more programming to happen. And we really hope that cfpvolunteermatch.org can be a great resource to connect CFP volunteers to programs that need them to help people grappling with the financial fallout of the pandemic. So in a nutshell, that's some of what we're doing. Would welcome feedback from folks by email. Now want to turn to Ryan to start our program today. Ryan, thanks again, and turning to you.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be able to help as much as possible here. A couple of just kind of housekeeping things before we get started. Please let me know if at any point you can't hear me. I'm testing out some new technology. I am also relying on a power source that is snaked into the bedroom of my 3-year-old who is currently napping, and he loves to unplug it. So my laptop should be good, but I might lose my second screen. So if I occasionally get flustered, it is because I'm parenting in the pandemic. As many of you know, it's a fun thing right now. Um, Q&A, we're going to try to do as much as possible with the Google Slides. So you can see on top of my slide there, and as well as in the chat box, there's a link to a Google Slides, and you can vote questions up or down there. I'm trying to keep questions there just because that way it's sort of easy to keep them all in one spot. In the chat, they might get lost as the conversation goes on. And then you can also vote questions up and down. So take a second and just click on that link or open it up so that if you want to ask a question, you can ask it there. You can see what questions others are asking. And we'll start with that at the end of the call as our sort of kicking off point for Q&A. And if anyone can type a question in there, I think it's always just helpful to get one in there at the beginning so that people kind of know it's there and remember. I'll try to remind you throughout. I will also be a couple points throughout asking people to put in some answers into the chat box. I got someone saying they can't see my screen. You should be able to see the slide that says FFP's response to COVID-19. Can someone let me know if that's widespread
I
or if
see
that's
it. I see it,
okay.
Ryan.
So I think it's up there. So if the so sorry, I'm gonna see who it was that wasn't seeing it. We'll try and do our best. Um, we will do Q&A at the end. I'll do some chat box stuff throughout because I think it's really important to kind of stay engaged as we go. So just know that I'll be asking you to put some questions in there. We'll sort of do this as collectively as possible. So with that, let's kick off. So just a quick overview of what we're doing today. We're going to do some conversation starters, what we know and don't know. We're going to talk stimulus checks. We're going to talk unemployment, rent and mortgage relief, student loan relief, all the other creditors, right? So all the other people that people owe bills to. Do a little bit on retirement accounts, and then we'll come back to that Q&A. Reminder, any questions, if possible, please put them on that Q&A with the Google Slides because that will be easier for us to all keep track of. We're clearly going to just scratch the surface. There is so much that has happened, and there's so much that's unique to people, and there's unique situations that we're not going to be able to get into as much depth as really this topic deserves today. But I think we will just be scratching the surface, and I think then it's sort of up to individuals from there to figure out, okay, what are the key pieces for the people I'm talking to. And I want to start with this video clip, and we'll see how this goes. Sound-wise, it may or may not work. I know doing embedded videos during webinars is sometimes not the best, but let's try it out. And if it doesn't work, we'll skip it. It's about 40 seconds.
We can't hear the sound, Ryan.
Yep, I kind of was worrying that was going to be the problem. I'm not sure a better way to do it. So if you want to look at the link, check it out later. But those who remember the movie Tommy Boy, which I actually watched recently because apparently I'm a 14-year-old boy, it's just a really good scene. This with this flight attendant being completely unable to hear what the question is being asked of her. So he's saying, "I need a trip to Chicago." She's saying, "I can get you to Salt Lake City." He's saying, "No, no, no, I need Chicago. I need Chicago today." She's responding with, "I can get you home from Chicago today." And I wanted to start with that just because I think it's so easy as advisors to think we know what someone's stress point is, especially given everything that's going on. We might think the thing in their head that's stressing them based on, a form they filled out or demographics information that we have, and we might be totally wrong. And so I think it's really important to like those active listening skills that we all, read one chapter on in CFP school and doesn't really do the skill justice to really be going back to those skills. Couple of questions that I think are really important for these sorts of conversations. Just start out with this. What would make our time together today the best use of your time and energy? Or another variation. What are you hoping will happen as a result of our meeting? So that awkward silence I just let fill in, that was only 5 seconds. The reason I gave that awkward silence is I think it's so important to ask this question and then just stop talking. Really important to let the person who is there share with you what is on their mind in sort of an uninterrupted way. And then once they initially answer the question, try and just really prompt them to get more into what's on their mind. So tell me more about that. That was interesting. Can you give me another example? Those sorts of prompts to get them talking and really uncover what is the thing that is stressing them and what is the way that you can be most helpful in this conversation rather than just spitting all the information at them, because some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today was completely meaningless to some of the people you're going to talk to, and others it's like the most pertinent thing they need to hear right at the right time. So I think skipping this step would be a real mistake, and I want to make sure people really kind of keep this in mind as they go about it. Both these questions, by the way, come from Advice That Sticks, which is a great, great book by Moira Summers. I know Kitsis has written a long piece on his blog about it. My study group did a 6-week book study on this text. I think it's an incredibly helpful book for giving really concrete ways to structure your meetings, and you'll see a huge increase in your ability to sort of really get at what people are wondering about and get them talking about the things that matter. All right, so I'm stealing a tweet from Jeff. I'm assuming a lot of people here know Jeff Levine. I probably should have told him I was stealing this. One thing I'm assuming he was talking about the Paycheck Protection Program, but I think this could apply to a lot of things right now. And I think we just all need to acknowledge what we know and what we don't know, and that the things we think we know may have changed in the last day, week, month, and could be subject to change in the future. So I think a really important answer if you're going about pro bono work right now is, I'm not sure on that, let me get back to you. We're the experts. We got the letters after our name. We've made careers of this. And so I think sometimes there's a temptation to always have the answers. But for a lot of us, we're probably talking about things we're not used to talking about when we're doing pro bono work, whether currently or more generally speaking, right? So I think being really cognizant that we don't know everything. We might have to get back to people. So depending on what structure you're doing this in, a follow-up email or a follow-up phone call after you have more time to really confirm what it is you're saying. I think that's really important because we don't want to give bad information. I had one person say the audio is garbled. Can someone let me know if that's a widespread issue? If it is, I have another headset I can switch to.
It's not garbled for me.
Okay. So whoever that was, I'm sorry. Just thank you for saying it, but it looks like it's pretty good on most end. Thank you. I'm going to get into all this now. We're going to get into some of the technical stuff, and I think what's going to be interesting about this is probably a lot of people on this call are pretty familiar with some of the things that I'm about to share. But we need to remember that the people that we are talking to probably are not. One, because they don't do it professionally, but I think even more than that, like if you're doing pro bono work right now, you are probably talking to someone who is very stressed, probably someone, for most of us who's very time starved. Obviously, I know that's different depending on your life circumstance, but if you're, a parent of a young child, you feel like you have less time than ever. So some of these things we may think, oh, that's been all over the news, they should already know that, and I would just assume nothing. I would assume absolutely nothing. And obviously it goes back to asking that first question of what do they want to get out of it. But really important to just start from the premise of they probably don't know some of the things that we may have already read, 14 times in various articles, talked about with our study group, seen in a Kitsis article, read the IRS website for, and they are just hearing about it, or they have some real misconception about it. So most of us are, the economic impact payments are more commonly known as the stimulus checks. $1,200 per adult, $500 per dependent per your most recently filed tax return. I think that's a really important thing. Take me, for example. We had a daughter on February 10th, so we have 2 kids. We will not get, $500 for her because that will actually get credited on the 2020 tax return. And that's a misconception some people aren't aware of. And so they may be misunderstanding how much is coming to them if they have, a kid that was born in late 2019 and they haven't filed their 2019 tax return yet, or if they were born in 2020. So that's one area I think I've already had a couple of people asking and being able to clean up. A lot of people do not know what AGI is or where to find it. So being really specific and telling them where they can find it so that they can enter it into some online tool and figure it out. You can of course help them too. If you've got if you've got the return in front of you, you may or may not, depending on how organized the person is or what kind of the structure is. And so telling them really specifically where they can find it. Of course, it's been updated from last year to this year because why would we ever keep it the same? We're beginning phase outs at 75 and 150, and then phasing out entirely at 99 for individuals and 198K of income for those who are filing jointly. I don't think probably with pro bono work you're going to have a lot of questions about the phase outs. It's certainly possible, but I'm not spending a whole lot of time there. Payments have begun. And supposedly half have been paid. I did a Twitter poll about this. Granted, it's a Twitter poll. It's not scientific. But I had about 250 responses, and it was about 60-40. So 60% of people, the question was phrased as, if you know you are eligible, which is, of course, a big caveat because some people aren't eligible, and your direct deposit information is with the IRS. So theoretically, these are the easiest possible people to get payments to, right? We know that they're eligible. We know their direct deposit info is on their 1040s, and it was about 60-40, 60% saying yes, 40% saying no. And if that's what's happening with the theoretically easiest folks to send money to, I would assume that there's going to be a lot of people who aren't getting it yet who you're talking to. I would use the IRS. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with this, but the irs.gov Get My Payment tool. That tool is starting to get better. It was pretty rough for the first couple of weeks, giving bad information, giving no information, telling people come back later. My own experience with that was I entered my information. I know my information was right. It told me my information was wrong. I had to basically enter 0 as the amount of my tax refund. When I entered the actual number of what my refund was, it told me my information was wrong. But when I entered 0, it let me through to put my direct deposit info. I don't know why I had to put my direct deposit info in there, considering it's been unchanged on the last 4 years of tax returns, and I pay quarterly taxes. But it did. So just know that these are coming. They're coming slowly. For those who haven't filed tax returns, they can go and put their direct deposit information there. And for those who, we have a large unbanked community in America. I think, if at all possible, getting some form of direct deposit for them is going to be really helpful because it's going to take a long time for this money to come out. If you don't have a direct deposit means. Last I read about it, they're going to do about 5 million checks per week, but 5 million checks per week, if they're thinking they're going to have to send 60 to 80 million checks via the mail, we're talking well into June, possibly July before some people are actually getting their checks. And so if you're someone who's really in a tough spot, that stimulus money coming sooner is going to be, really difference making in their lives. So if they do not have a bank account that they can direct deposit to, sometimes you can get like a debit card and submit that information. That may or may not work with the IRS's site, but that may be one way to get it loaded up for them. Reminder about the audience tool. I see a couple people have quick questions in there already. I'm not going to stop for the questions now, but we will definitely talk about them at the end. A reminder, you can vote questions up and down. You can put questions in there to the audience tool. So again, just remember there's the Q&A at the top. It's also, if you need a link to it, scroll up to the very top of the chat box. In fact, I can actually put it here again. I just put it back in the chat again. So you can see that there. So we're going to talk expanded unemployment for a minute here. So A lot of questions here, and I think for most advisors, this is a space we're not typically familiar with. And I'll be frank in saying that it's an area I'm learning a lot about too. I know a decent amount about Louisiana's, but in talking to people in any other states, every state has its own rules, its own deadlines, its own systems. So just being cognizant that it's a thing that varies a lot from state to state. So the first thing to know, and I think is really important, is that this has been expanded to for the first time to self-employed workers. So people who may not have been eligible in the past are eligible now for unemployment. So people who work 1099 contract jobs, people even, Uber drivers, Lyft drivers. I live down in New Orleans here, and that's obviously a large part of, there are a lot of people who do, they play music, and then they're also an Uber driver. So all their income's 1099. They would not normally be eligible. They are currently eligible. If you're eligible for $1 benefits, you're eligible for an additional $600 a week through July 31st. This is the controversy of people sometimes making more than they were making before. And so that's something that's really makes the unemployment benefits, actually make people whole and then some. So for those who are eligible, taking the time to get them is really important. One thing is when I created this, so late last week, we had 44 states that have been paying this. There were still 6 states that are not. I was trying to find that this morning and I didn't find a good stat on it, but just know that there are a few states that still haven't started paying that $600 a week. So do the research on your own state. I purposely didn't put the names up there because it's changing so quickly. I don't want people to rely on it, but just know that it's possible your state isn't paying it out yet, and they should be. Average payments range really significantly. You see the range there from Mississippi to Massachusetts. Keep in mind that's without the additional 600. So in Mississippi, if you also get the 600, you might be looking at 813 a week on up to 1755 a week in Massachusetts. Really, really big difference. Obviously, being cognizant that where you are located is going to make a big difference on how much you're getting there. Most states typically pay unemployment for 26 weeks. There are a few that do a little less than that. There are a few that do a little more than that. And the federal government is now paying for an additional 13 weeks of unemployment. So whatever your state does plus 13 weeks is now how long these benefits are running. I just linked an article right there, and so this will get sent out. That's just one of the more helpful explainers that I've read on this topic. There are others as well. I just thought that one was really helpful in having me help wrap my brain around some of the different implications of all the new provisions. So how do we actually get unemployment? So a couple of things. One, some of you may know there's a 1 week waiting period typically, and you have to be applying for jobs. Both of those have been waived. Obviously, if we're trying to get people to stay home, we're trying not to make them go out and apply for jobs as well. That would be contradictory. And then the 1 week waiting period. So theoretically, you're eligible as soon as you get through the system. One thing to be really cognizant of is that watch for different cliffs. So unemployment benefits are taxable income. For some federal programs, that's going to have an implication. For some, it will not. So Medicaid, it may not have an implication, but with SNAP benefits, food stamps, it will. ACA subsidies, it will. So if you have someone who has an ACA subsidy for their health care and they're taking unemployment benefits, and maybe there's someone who's actually making more money on unemployment than they were making prior, it's possible that they could go over one of the ACA cliffs for the subsidy they're getting on healthcare, and that may actually end up costing them in the long run. So that's one area to really look out for, and especially if you have people, sub $40,000 or so of annual income, that's something that might, and who buy their own health insurance, that's something to look out for. Most states are doing online applications. You can also go to an unemployment office and apply, although of course doing that in person right now is not ideal. So if possible to take advantage of online resources, that's the best way to go. Many are still requiring a phone call and a weekly certification that your situation hasn't changed. Wait times are exceptionally long. We've all read probably the stories of people, being on hold for hours or calling 150 times. I know someone here who would get up every single day and call at the earliest hours. I know our governor here in Louisiana said, the best times to apply are between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. because that's when the website has the least amount of traffic on it. So we've seen the unemployment numbers. I think it's 26 million in the last 5 weeks. That's probably an understatement of the true number of people who are unemployed. One resource I want to put on your radar, I have no affiliation with this company. It's just a tool I've used a little bit. So there's a kind of a robot lawyer app called Do Not Pay, and Do Not Pay built a tool that will apply for unemployment for people on their behalf in all 50 states. There's typically a monthly fee for Do Not Pay. I think it's really cheap. It's like $3, but it's being waived right now. So people who are using it to put in their information for unemployment can do that, and it should hopefully save them some time. I do not, have any association with Do Not Pay, so I don't know their full business model or what they're doing with the data. I think it's always important to understand what they're doing with the data. From their public proclamations, it seems like they are not selling any data or sharing any information inappropriately. But I think we've all, learned to be a little bit cautious of that these days. Thanks. I see a few more questions are coming in. That's great. And people can kind of vote those up and down as we go. So we're going to switch to mortgage relief, talk about mortgage relief for a minute. Excuse me. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. I just thought, can we get a link to this presentation? I'll leave it to John and Rachel and everyone at the foundation. I'm happy to share it. So mortgage relief. So any borrower whose mortgages are owned by Fannie or Freddie, which is like 80 to 90% last I looked, it allows your payments to be suspended for up to 12 months. So essentially you call, you say, I'm not able to make my payments due to COVID-19. And if your mortgage is federally backed, you're allowed to not make those payments. It has not been made super clear how that's going to be handled. I'm sure that's going to be figured out in the next few days, weeks, months. But just know that, the assumption, and this, to be perfectly frank, gets me out of my element of knowledge, but the assumption, at first seemed to be, we'll just, lengthen the term of your mortgage. You'll still owe the same amount. It would just be, shifted back a little bit. But then you get into the bond holders and whether they're going to accept those terms and all kinds of things that frankly are beyond my knowledge. So it may not end up being that easy. There is some fear out there that when all this is over, people may owe all of the missed payments. I do not believe that is the intention, but that is a fear that is out there. And I wouldn't feel 100% confident in telling people anything beyond that they're allowed to miss payments, that we think that they might be able to just extend the length of their mortgage, but I would not say that 100% definitively. At least I haven't read that as of today. Moratorium on foreclosures until May 18th. We could look for that to be possibly extended. But that's what it is as of now. This is the website, and this will be in the FFP PDF that they're going to send out. But this is a link where you can go and actually check, does this mortgage, is it owned by Fannie or Freddie? So you can actually see like, oh yeah, this person does qualify. You enter like address and a couple of other pieces of information. And then you'll be able to see, yes, it is owned by Fannie or Freddie. No, it's not. So that way, when you call the servicer for the mortgage, you're able to say, yes, it does qualify. See a question here about rumor is it can hurt someone's credit rating. TBD. So the credit rating question, I know that there is some legislators, Elizabeth Warren and a few others, who are trying to make sure that it is clarified that nothing impacts FICO credit scores coming out of this for taking that mortgage forbearance. But that has not been officially stated, and as we all know, credit reporting agencies are not exactly the easiest to get something cleared up with, so that has not been made clear yet. Rental relief. So for those who don't own but live in a house that is, has a mortgage on it that is federally backed, so theoretically the same tool that would tell you whether or not you qualify, is the same tool you'd want to be looking to. Any renter who lives in that home theoretically cannot be evicted. Of course, how do you know if your home is backed by Fannie or Freddie? That's going to be a tough one because you have to enter information that you probably don't have access to. This is effective through July 31st. As of right now, I would continue to look for any extensions on some of this stuff. We don't know. Depends on how different states are going to handle it at the state level. Sorry, jumping ahead of myself. But at the federal level, July 31st. Cities and states have their own rent protections and programs as well. So I'll speak for New Orleans. I know evictions were suspended. Eviction court has been suspended at this time. But those are all running on different deadlines. When they expire is different. How it's managed, whether it's a city issue, a state issue, a county, or parish where I live. So just know that's a hyper local issue, what your benefits are there. And so you're going to want to research that very specifically. I know that some places the timeline has already expired. So like they announced it in early March, they put it through, April 24th, and it's already expired. Of course, if no court proceedings are happening, then eviction court can't happen. But it's something to be aware of that the initial relief may already have expired and may or may not have been extended, especially politically, depending on how your state or locality is handling this. They may be starting to pull back on some of those things in order to encourage people to go out more. Any questions, if possible, if you can put them into the Q&A tool, just because that organizes it really easily. I see a couple coming through, but it's really hard to keep track of. So if possible to put them into the Google Q&A, that's going to be easier long term, especially as the scroll makes it hard to make sure we don't miss any questions. Resource here is from Eviction Lab. So they are tracking all the different renter relief that is going on. That's being constantly updated. So if you go there, it should be relatively recent, although I would also try and use official sources from your own city and state government as much as possible. Let's talk student loans. Student loan relief. This is a big one on a lot of people's mind, and one I've been getting a lot of questions about. So suspension of payments and 0% interest on most federal student loans. The reason I say most is that if you've got FFEL loans for Ford Family Education Program, typically 2010 and before, it hasn't been consolidated. You're not eligible. Sorry, some of those are not eligible. It's not all FFEL loans aren't eligible, just some of them are not eligible. The ones that are not owned by the federal government. So essentially, if the federal government isn't the ultimate holder of the loan, and they've contracted that out, or they've sold that off, then it theoretically wouldn't count. There is proposed legislation to make all federal student loans included here, but just know that it's federal direct loans. So Perkins loans may or may not qualify. Healthcare loans, so if you have specific nursing school loans or those sorts of things, may or may not qualify. The easiest way to know, honestly, this has been handled remarkably well, and I'm not particularly kind to student loan servicers, but it is, after a lot of bad information at the jump, I think they've been doing a pretty good job. I have personally been logged into Navient, Nelnet, Mohila, and Great Lakes, which are the 4 biggest federal student loan servicers, and for people who qualify, as of about April 10th, all of their interest rates have been set to 0. So you'll log in and you'll literally see your interest rate is set to 0. And then they turned off everyone's auto pay. So anyone that was making payments via an automated payment, it was just turned off. So there are no due dates. If you have that relief, you don't have to pay anything. There's no interest. So theoretically, you're not costing yourself anything for people who qualify. You can also request a refund for payments made on 3/13 or later. That process is still being built, build the airplane as it's already in the air sort of thing. So if someone made a payment after 3/13 and they really need that money, they can request that back. So I would definitely encourage them to do so if they're, really scrambling for cash and looking at things like, skipping a mortgage payment. That's obviously a really big deal. And if you can get them a few $100s back that allows them to not skip a mortgage payment, then great. I wouldn't expect it to be fast. I think we just need to acknowledge that it's a system not really designed to give money back very efficiently. And as we've seen with the stimulus checks, giving money back doesn't always go as smoothly as we'd like it to. So I definitely think it's worth bringing up and pushing people to take advantage of if they need it. But I wouldn't think you're going to get it back in a week or two. I would expect it to be more like a month, if not more. That is complete speculation on my part. This expires as of now on September 30th. So let's take a look at a few of these situations. So of course, I think this is the obvious one. If you've got uncertain or reduced income or lost your job, just save it as much as humanly possible or use it to cover other bills. If you have high interest debt, so maybe you haven't lost your job, haven't reduced, had a reduction in income, but you're carrying credit card debt. Certainly it makes sense to pay off credit card debt at 20% instead of paying down, something that's currently at 0% interest. And so I would definitely encourage that and kind of making sure that they're prioritizing correctly in terms of what's going to get them the most bang for their buck and their use of the dollars that they're spending. If you're working towards forgiveness, so if someone is working towards public service loan forgiveness or the 20 or 25-year forgiveness, so going on one of those income-driven plans, these months count. So there's literally no reason to be making a payment. So if the person you're talking to qualifies for public service loan forgiveness, which is a whole hour-long, semester-long course in itself, frankly, but if they are, and you know that they're on track for it, and make sure that they are on track for it, they shouldn't be paying at all, because these months, they're supposed to get 6 credited months for this time. And so by making a payment, they're essentially paying on a loan that has no interest, doesn't have a payment due, and they're already going to get the credit for the month regardless of if they make the payment or not. So it just doesn't make sense to use a scarce resource there. FFEL loans that aren't eligible. So if you have some of those FFEL loans that aren't eligible, you can do a direct loan consolidation, which essentially you go to studentaid.ed.gov, and you can consolidate your loans into a direct loan, and then you become eligible at that point. Usually that process takes about a month, so you might not get the full scope of everything, of all the benefit. Probably not a ton of people we're talking to in this situation, but if they have stable income and they have a good backstop of emergency savings and they don't have credit card debt, they should just keep paying. And the more they can pay down now, the less in total interest they're going to pay. I don't think we're going to have a ton of people in that boat that we're doing pro bono work for, but there could be some. Quick slide on other creditors. Anyone you can negotiate with. This is time consuming, which stinks because a lot of people don't have time right now. But calling, and it's important to, of course, to make sure that you note COVID-19. So like that should be the first thing out of your mouth, like due to the coronavirus or due to COVID-19, I have lost my job. I'm caring for a sick spouse, whatever the reason might be. Maybe they've lost the primary earner in the family has passed away. Any of those are situations, but you need to actually say it. I think we sort of assume right now, because this is such a permeating part of our lives, that we all know it, but if you don't actually say it, they might not be able to give you the full amounts of flexibility that is offered. And I've had that confirmed by a few people I know who have called into these places and just tried to see, like, if I don't say it, what is offered, and then if I call back and do say, like, I have this specific reason, and it definitely makes a difference in what major corporations are able to offer in terms of flexibility. Car insurance rebates vary. Props to Ron Lieber and Micah Hoffman, I think is his last name, and many others who kind of hounded a lot of car insurance companies into giving some rebates because so few people were driving. They're all different. Some are credits at renewal, some are coming off your next monthly payment, some are actually being refunded to you. It's all different, but just make sure you're looking out for that. And then utilities. So again, I'll speak to the city of New Orleans. We've suspended utility shutoffs. So like our sewage and water board is notorious for shutting off people's water when they haven't paid. Or are unable to pay. A lot of places have put a moratorium on that right now. So, if you're helping them prioritize bills in order of what must be paid and what maybe can wait a week or two, check and see if the utilities are on that list of things that can wait a week or two. Of course, that's not an ideal circumstance, but if you're talking to someone who's really in dire straits, that might be something that they can, forgo for a week or two, and then not have any initial negative consequence in terms of, losing their water, or their heat, or I guess AC at this time of year. But that varies. So of course, confirm that's actually possible where you live. Thanks. I see about 6 questions have come in. We're going to keep going back and forth with those in a second. Excuse me. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. I don't want to spend too much time. I'm going to go ahead and keep going. I know that it sounds like there's a couple people who aren't muted. I know that's not ideal, but I also want to make sure we can wrap up and get some Q&A time. I'm going to go on from this just because it's probably not the most commonly asked thing, but just, you can take a larger loan than usual. You can do a 10%, you can do it without the 10% withdrawal, and the taxes are due. I didn't put this on the slide, but over 3 years. A couple other special considerations during this time. And I think this is really important, where your listening skills that we talked about at the beginning and really hearing and understanding their situation is so important. So one suggestion that you'll see out there in the world is that clients shouldn't pay off credit cards in full. So the thinking behind this is that credit card companies have, like in the 2008 Great Recession, They have, once somebody paid off part of what they owed, they reduced or eliminated their credit line. So effectively, they end up with less backstop than they had before versus like paying the minimum, letting some debt revolve, and then keeping cash in the savings account or checking account. Again, so I think it's not, if someone's really in dire straits, I would certainly prefer they let a little credit card interest roll over than, skip mortgage payments, for example. But you really have to understand what are their different priorities, what are the things that are important to them, what's their unique situation, because that's obviously not a typical recommendation that we would make to let a credit card balance revolve. But it is something that I think can make sense if you want to make sure that they don't, say they owed 2,000, they pay 1,000 of it off, and then they get their credit limit reduced by that. They're effectively now, have a lot shorter, safety net. Another one, should not make extra mortgage payments. I think that probably most people we're talking to already know that, but if you happen to talk to someone who's, of the mindset that they're going to prepay their mortgage, right? That's a classic thing. I know I learned that from my parents, but my parents also had a 14% mortgage. Mine's 3.25. But I know a lot of people make extra mortgage payments, so I would try and make sure that they turn those off if that's a thing that was happening. Literally contact anyone and ask them to postpone payments. Talked about this a little bit on the last slide, but like cars, utility companies, cell phone bills, private student loans, like you name it, ask. Trying to make sure as much as possible it doesn't affect FICO score, a little bit out of our hands. This is something that I've had come up twice, which is very, very interesting, which is there are people who I've talked to who, have lost a job and they've got a good emergency fund, 15 grand, and they're scared to use it. So I think just giving people permission, hey, this is the emergency. This is why you have it. Use it now. Now is the time to use it. And I know that sounds crazy, but I think people really have been taught for so long. Like if someone is, lucky enough and has set themselves up to be in the position to have a big emergency fund, it can be hard to use it. In the same way, if you talk to a retiree who like struggles to start spending in retirement because they built this habit for so long, and you're trying to undo the habit. So just give people permission. If you have cash on hand, now is the time. This is what it's here for. All right, I want to take questions now, so I'm going to kill my second. Actually, before I take questions, a couple other resources. These came throughout. We're going to send this out, and we've already talked about this, but Foundation for Financial Planning Coronavirus. The New York Times has a great hub, thanks to Ron and Tara over there for their work. And then Eviction Lab is the one that's updating everything with the different city and state and local versions of their various rent protections. So I'm going to go to different audience tools. I'm also going to let you see my face at this point, just because if we're doing Q&A, that probably makes sense to do. Can you see me? Here I am. Hi. This looks a little bit like a hostage video, I'm realizing. All right, so starting at the top, what is the biggest risk of error when starting pro bono work with a different population than our regular clients? Really great question. I would say two things that I would be cognizant of. And one is just you're outside of your comfort zone. You think you need to be the expert, and you might just be talking about something you don't normally talk about. So for me, that's unemployment benefits. Like I have 3 of my own personal clients that actually are filing for unemployment because they were 1099 and they've lost their whole income, and they're asking me questions, and I'm just having to really work to say, let me get back to you on that. I'm not sure. I want to get back to you tomorrow. It's not a natural thing, I think, for a lot of us to do. So I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing is just making assumptions about what's on their mind. So for example, if you were working a $30,000 a year job and you have a couple of kids that you're supporting, the stock market may not be remotely near your concern. Right? But for many of us, we've been fielding phone calls about markets and what should I do, and should I be doing Roth conversions and all this stuff, right? Or, should I be dollar cost averaging in if I'm a young person right now? What should I, they're just a totally different thing that's on their mind. So those are the two I would say in terms of errors. Is one, just like not being willing to say you don't know, and two, misunderstanding what their priority is. Probably kick this one to the foundation. It says, I'd be interested in a package solution so our chapter volunteers can easily implement a plug and play presentation. If John or Rachel or someone else from the foundation, if you can follow up on that, but some sort of, it seems like a PowerPoint or something that they can be delivered by others to kind of spread this as well. Engagement letters for virtual meetings. Our FPA chapter is setting up a pro bono program where represents virtual financial planning days. Sample letters on FFP and FPA websites. They're long and might discourage someone from seeking advice. I am the worst person possible to ask this question because I wouldn't be having them sign it, and I know I'm not supposed to be saying that, so I'm going to also defer on that one. If John, you want to take your mic off mute, I'm happy to have you answer that. But in terms of sample letters or engagement letters and what the best practice is for pro bono, maybe it's the bleeding heart in me, but I feel like if someone is reaching out and they need help, I typically just help them. And obviously, there's limits to how much help you can give, but that's generally how I do it, which is probably not the right answer, but it's my answer. Question is, for those individuals that had children this year, will they get a payment at a later date? Yes. So this is super weird. The economic impact payments are for the 2020 tax year, and they're using your most recently filed tax return as the estimate of what you will get. And it can only be in your favor. It cannot be clawed back. So I'll give two examples, one fine, one horrible. You have a baby, like me, I had a baby February 10th. Well, I didn't, my wife did. And she's not on our 2019 tax return, so ours would not have two dependents. It would only have one dependent. But on our 2020 return, assuming we are under the AGI limit, we would get a $500 credit on our 2020 return. Now let's go, like, this is morbid, but let's say you are married and your spouse passes away in 2020, but you would have otherwise qualified. They're not, if you got $2,400, they're not going to claw back $1,200 because your 2020 return doesn't have you as married filing jointly. So that's, as I understand it, how those are going to be working. Unemployment for people that have recently moved from state to state, where do they apply with a new program in place, especially with the 13 weeks the Fed is covering? So I'm going to practice what I preach here and say, I'm not sure about that. Let me get back to you. So I will try to put this answer out. Honestly, the easiest way, I'm just going to put it out on Twitter later today. So I'm making a note to myself. So if you follow me, it's rfralick at Twitter. It's mostly just dumb jokes and New Orleans culture. But I'll put it out there. I'll also try to send it. I can't send it directly because it comes from anonymous. So if you're wondering about unemployment moving from state to state, I will put out some tweets about it as soon as I find them, which may or may not reach you, but it's the best I can offer right now because I don't have a name for that person. I'm sorry. Does the rent relief apply to commercial property as well? I believe that's going to be more of a local issue. So I would check state and local regulations on that one because I think you're going to have some places yes and some places no. So I'd be really cognizant that that's going to vary from place to place. How does suspension of federal student loan payments impact individuals enrolled in public service loan forgiveness? And then a similar question from Michael about impact on longer term loan forgiveness. So the text of the law, I'm actually going to pull it up just so I can read it because I have it here because I've been asked this question a lot. The text of the CARES Act very specifically says that these months count. So I'm actually just going to read it real quickly. It says, the Secretary shall deem each month for which a loan payment was suspended under this section as if the borrower of the loan had made a payment for the purpose of any loan forgiveness or loan rehabilitation program. So again, they're saying, any month for which a loan payment was suspended under this section, that will be treated as though a payment had been made for loan forgiveness programs. So for PSLF, theoretically, they get 6, or depending on when their payment is, 7 payments credited. Because if you had one after March 13th, say it's March 15th, we get March, April, May, June, July, August, September. You got 7 free PSLF months. Do I expect servicers to screw it up? Yes, I absolutely expect servicers to screw it up. But the text of the law is crystal clear on that one. That's people saying the audio went out, but sound disruption. Sorry, we had a couple of questions I'm going to skip over here. If an IRA withdrawal was done in January 2020, they cannot roll over after the 60 days. Yes or no? IRA withdrawal was done. They cannot roll over after 60 days. Yes or no? I'm not sure I totally understand the question. I know that they could put the money back in. So, for example, if they didn't need to make an IRA withdrawal, for their own spending purposes, they were just making it for RMD purposes, that can be put back. In terms of the rollover, yes, it is 3513. Sorry, going in too many spots. I'm going to take a couple of chat box questions and then I will turn it back over. If you have a graduating senior who had a job offer that gets rescinded, can they file unemployment? Yes, they can. I would check local state and regulations for that, but I'm 85% certain on this one. Thanks, Andy Duke, thinking in bets. Yes. Oh, Terry, thanks for putting in that question. Terry, a peace of mind. I'm just making a note of that. There's a lot of stuff flying around. It specifically state this comments will count towards any forgiveness plan or just PSLF. It says or any forgiveness program. So yeah, it's in 3513, which is the section of the CARES Act about student loans. I'm going to pull it back up again just to make sure I'm saying it right. But it says for the purpose of any loan forgiveness program is the language in the text. Now, of course, the language in the text, what actually gets implemented, we've all seen there's been some discrepancies there, but it seems pretty clear that for public service loan forgiveness, teacher loan forgiveness, and long-term, 20 or 25-year loan forgiveness, yes. Where it is not clear is various state programs, things authorized via like Health and Human Services or Army or Navy, because there's all these other federal but not Department of Education loan forgiveness programs. So I would be 100% confident in the PSLF teacher loan forgiveness 20 and 25 year. I would be less confident in the others because those are authorized under a different section. I don't have written guidance, Leslie. I will try to follow up on that. But I will try to do that. And then I'm being asked, can I share the PowerPoint? I'm happy to share it out, and I'll work with the foundation to make sure that that gets shared out on that question. And I will turn it back over. I know I kind of stumbled into the end, but I will turn it back over to the foundation to wrap up. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, it's Ryan@deliberatefinances.com or it's @rfreilich on Twitter. Happy to